Fantastic. We were back there shuffling who goes first, sitting down. We got our act together. Well, thank you so much for coming up to talk with us today, Sam.
Sure.
I'm incredibly excited about this opportunity to talk with you on stage. For context, I've read 5 of his books. He has many more. They keep coming out. I'm sure there'll be many more to come. And they cover a diverse set of topics that I think actually interweave, and we'll try to get to that maybe towards the end of the conversation, some of the themes that integrate his work and his philosophy. But they cover everything from free will, morality, how we could study that as a form of science, of course, topics on religion and the fate of our planet. And for today, there's a subset of this whole thing that I think can bring sort of into sharp light some of his thinking and some of the philosophical and deep, profound human elements that come from thinking about the future of AI. So my plan would be to talk a bit about that. Why AI is even worth talking about. Why is it a real thing, if you will, and why now? Like, why worry about something that's still a ways off? And by AI, I think from this point on in the conversation, we're generally going to be talking about the AI that you might envision that is comparable to human AI. So someone might call this AGI, or a general intelligence that's artificial. But we'll get into this. But generally, why is this important? Why might it happen? What are the implications if it does? And then branch off of that to all the other topics of what that might teach us about ourselves and what we might learn about that in the future social fabric of society. Things like concentration of power and inequality and how these might relate to these topics. So with that, thanks again.
Yeah.
And let me start with a general question, which is, why do you think we're on a march to an AI future? Why is it something that we should just take as a given that this will happen?
Well, when you think of just what it means to build intelligent machines and automate processes that we care about, this is the most important game that we're playing in technology. I mean, intelligence is the most valuable resource we have. It is the source of everything we value, or it is the thing we use to protect everything we value. And so it just seems to me that it's just patently obvious that if we're able to improve our intelligent machines, we will. So the only alternative really is to, for some reason, not be able to do that. And if you look at the reasons why we might not be able to do that, those are, by definition, terrifying. I mean, these are, on some level, civilizational catastrophes that prevent us from making improvements to hardware and software permanently. And so there's one. There are many assumptions here that I think confuse people about this picture of inevitability. One is, many people assume that we need Moore's law to continue, or we need exponential progress. No, we just need progress. It can be as incremental as you like. We just have to keep going. Eventually, we will get into the end zone here, unless that is something terrible happens. And so that's.
You say terrible, but this could be even the simple thought experiment of relinquishment, that we're just going to stop advancing in technology, which seems absurd because these advances are so tightly coupled to almost every vector of economic growth. It's like,
right.
I know as an investor that every company I see is working on incorporating a little bit of what would be a path to AI in their products, a little deep learning network, a little bit of machine intelligence. And to think that all that gets put aside and no improvements occur in all these fields is just unfathomable.
Yeah. I mean, we would have to have a reason to decide not to do that, and there may be reasons to make that decision. But given the incentives and given the kind of the arms race nature of the situation we're in, it's hard to picture. And it's just a more.
So we have, to summarize this part of it, we have economic incentives to keep marching this direction, and if everyone's left to their normal devices in a capitalistic society, we're going to get there, and it's going to be a race, in a sense, to this great power of the future. How about just a quick comment on the feasibility and belief you have that this is inevitable? Why should someone in the room think this is a future that will happen technically, that in fact we will get there? What gives you that confidence?
Right. Well, it's interesting that even people in this business who are producing this technology, I think many of you probably somewhere harbor a doubt that minds can be platform independent. I think there's an assumption. I mean, it's not an assumption that many people would want to defend at this point, but I think it's working in the background that there may be something magical about having a computer made of meat, or that the atoms in our heads might be doing something other than information processing, or doing something that silicon can't do as a matter of just physical fact. And so that there's something about biological substrate that is important. There are very few people in biology and certainly in neuroscience who think that that's true. And I see really no reason to think that's true. And I think we'll find ourselves at some point in the future where we're, swapping out diseased parts of our brain with, artificial neurons, and those neurons will function like real neurons. And as long as the inputs and the outputs are conserved, we'll recognize that it's the functional organization of physical systems that gives us intelligence. Surely many people recognize that already. But there is this assumption, many people are just common sense dualists. They think there's a ghost in the machine, there's something magical that's giving us, if not intelligence per se, at the very least consciousness. So consciousness has to be something that's separate. And I think those do break apart. I think it's conceivable that we could build super intelligent machines that are not conscious, and that's almost the worst case scenario from my point of view ethically. But
we want to come back to that later, because that'll be like when we reach this future. I want to talk about that scenario. But let's see if I can summarize what I've heard so far. This notion of vitalism or dualism, I do see it, by the way, all over the place, including some of the most cutting-edge, scientists, if you will, where they might say a generalization like, well, but these neural networks are never going to feel emotion. Like they'll draw a line there. Somehow that's magical to, again, meat space. Or they won't have the consciousness, or they won't have whatever we consider as uniquely human, in a sense, as an attribute. And there really isn't a good argument for why that won't happen. And the other thing is that you see little peeks into the self-organizing nature of these neural nets, again, patterned on our brain, that they recapitulate our own biology all over the place. Like our vision systems get edge detection, whether artificial or biological. They form these hierarchical layers just in the way that they're trained. And so I think there's already hints that we can recapitulate our biology in silicon systems. And so why wouldn't that go the whole way to a human comparable or vastly greater than human machine?
Yeah. And that's an interesting point there. The idea that human comparable is a landmark we're going to hit, I think, is also an illusion. I think that's a mirage where if we arrive at it,
it's not like an endpoint.
We'll blow past it in an hour, because just think of what would be entailed here. Right now we have these piecemeal systems of narrow AI that are within their purview actually superhuman. I mean, so the calculator on your phone is superhuman in its ability to do arithmetic. So integrating all of these capacities in some general intelligence, you would have to consciously dumb it all down to have human level AI. I mean, that presumably whatever is general is going to calculate at least as well as our phones. And so it will be with facial recognition and the detection of the facial display of emotion, or emotion in a tone of voice. These systems will be integrated with the totality of human knowledge, instantly on the internet. It's just we'll have to really aim at human level and try to stay there deliberately, and I don't really see that happening.
So let me think if there's anything more on the precursors or foundations that we want to cover on how we get from here to there. Perhaps, what does your gut feel in terms of paint this picture for people, in terms of how democratized versus concentrated this is? Is it that a few entities pull ahead and race to the finish line, do you think? Is there something inherent in the way these are being developed that lends that conclusion, or do you think it's going to happen simultaneously in several places across the planet?
Well, it certainly seems like we're poised for some kind of winner-take-all scenario. I don't know. I'm not so inside that I know how far ahead any one group is than any other. But if you just look at the consequences of an organization like Google making the first real breakthrough, when you actually unpack the implications of truly super intelligent general AI, which can then make changes to itself, right? Then that becomes the basis of further development. To be a few months ahead of the competition is to be thousands of years ahead on some level, because just the time frame over which this progress can be made. So I think unless we have some political realignment of incentives, I think it is a race condition, and then it's kind of a winner-take-all.
Right. Yeah. And this is one of these little peeks into the future, I think, world that we live in. This little precursor when we talk about the post-AI world of what seems to be an ever-accelerating concentration of network effects. We hear them all day long, and they're powerful. And if you take this to its ultimate extreme, more and more of the global economy will be captured by a smaller and smaller number of concentrated power brokers. So folks are in some race to both improve products all along the way, because again, let's keep in mind, it's not as if they're off in a lab working on a brain in a box for 20 years and now it pops a brain in a box. It's like every step along the way, it's improving voice recognition systems and vision systems and medical information systems and robotic control systems and autonomous cars. It's like all that work is pushing in the same direction. So let's talk a bit about what the world starts to look like and some of the ethics and morality of this. I often hear AI practitioners talk about how do we build a friendly AI. This was maybe 20 years ago. Eli and some others were trying to write white papers on how to maximize the chance that your AI is going to be friendly. And there seem to be two inherent problems with this. One is the notion that you have any control whatsoever. To me, it's more akin to parenting. It's like, how can you, before you've even conceived the child, make sure that as a teenager, it's going to be purely, add your adjectives, moral, just, care for animals, whatever you want as an attribute. Like, how exactly is that going to happen in a system as complex or more so than a human? And then secondly, the notion is, well, and if it is in fact a system that's as complex, emotionally rich as a human, what makes you think control is the right framework in the first place? And to me, it sounds like indentured servitude. And so, or cognitive slavery, perhaps. Do those ideas resonate with you?
Well, again, the variable of consciousness, I think, is what makes this ethically important. So if the lights are not on, if you're talking about an intelligent system that it can be superhuman, but there's nothing that it's like to be that system. It can't suffer, it can't experience any change in its well-being. It's no more sentient, really, than this carpet. If in fact that's true, I mean, and I'm sort of agnostic about whether or not consciousness at any point comes along for the ride just of necessity as you get more and more intelligent. But let's say it doesn't. Let's say you can build intelligence without consciousness. Then there are no ethical implications. Then we can enslave these machines. We can, when you switch them off, you're not committing a murder. I mean, there is no problem there. It becomes problematic when you imagine now we're building minds that can suffer potentially to one or another degree. They can like or not like their circumstance. Again, I mean, just be sensitive to how this sounds when you hear it. I think many of us doubting that the consciousness and mind can be platform independent. We doubt that this is even potentially on the menu. The idea that we might build simulated worlds in a computer that have simulated minds that are actually conscious, right? Like that sounds impossible to some of you, but implicit in that doubt is this idea that consciousness requires something other than information processing at bottom. Again, there are very few people who think that now. So if you imagine inadvertently or not building circumstances where you're essentially consigning new sentient minds to unending drudgery and perhaps even pain, that'd be a very bad thing to do. But if you flip that, you could imagine. I mean, this is sort of the control scenario you flagged. If we built minds that simply actually wanted to be slaves, so that their utility function is, maximized by, just faithful execution of slavish tasks.
Large,
Right. That seems like I'm sure there are problems in envisioning that as a totally stable scenario, because again we're talking about systems that, being more intelligent than we are, can form new goals that we can't necessarily envision, and so if there's a good analogy here, which I think I first heard from Nate Soares, who works at the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, but it sort of will push your intuitions with respect to how the the utility function and the goals that have been programmed into a machine may be blind to what happens in the future. When you look at the sort of goal architecture of evolution, I mean, we've evolved along the primate line really to do nothing other than successfully breed, right? I mean, so so evolutionary psychology is a story of how our minds are strongly coupled to the imperatives of breeding and surviving long enough to provide for the next generation. So evolution can't see and will never see most of what we care about. Evolution does not see conversations like this. It does not see mathematics. It does not see most of what we care about. And most of what's good in civilization is our defying the programmed imperatives of evolution. So, we're strongly programmed for in-group, out-group thinking, xenophobia and tribal violence, and these are things we really want to overcome, and for good reason, because this is what's making life so difficult. But the overcoming of all that is something that evolution doesn't see, right, and hasn't programmed us for. So we are these apes who have formed a layer of kind of mental priority and goal-seeking behavior, which is, in many respects, completely hostile to the dictates of evolution. I mean, anyone who's using contraception is just defying evolution at each, every night. So you can imagine machines that are making thousands of years of progress, human-level intellectual progress, every week, given how much faster they process information than we do. It's very hard to see that we will have launched them in a way that is reliably immune to any change of goals or to developing new goals.
I think it's a really good point. To me, I use the term evolutionary algorithm broadly. Any iterative algorithm that compounds complexity. It could be deep learning. It could be literally evolution itself, and variation and selection and so forth. And inevitably, across all these, you get an artifact that does something. It survived. It breeded. But you don't necessarily understand its inner workings. And the notion that you would evolve in the sense of growing in AI, there's inevitably some selection pressure embedded, even subtle, that gives a path dependence to its own survival. It's sort of almost impossible to imagine that self-preservation, in some sense, wouldn't inevitably be part and parcel of the process of its creation.
Right.
And to think that you just sort of can sculpt out. The analogy I might use is we all know how to make an intelligent machine. You have a baby, right? That doesn't mean we understand the brain of a baby, or that neuron does this, that one does that. Let's give it French-speaking capacity. Let's make it a little less neurotic. Like, good luck, right? I strongly believe we'll build an intelligence of that scale before we understand one of that scale. And that fits perfectly in line with what you're saying. It seems like a folly to think you would have control over such a mind if it's of sufficient power.
Right.
Now, I want to ask one thing, because there was a thread earlier that I cut off, and I don't know if I heard you right or wrong, when you were talking about the other world, the carpet AI, I might call it, the carpetbaggers, with no emotion, consciousness, yet hyper-intelligent. Did you say earlier that's a worse scenario or scarier scenario, or did I mishear you?
Well, it's scarier in the sense that it closes the door to one, admittedly also scary outcome, but one that's arguably less bad. So I heard at least one AI researcher make these noises, which we'll see if you find them any more compelling than I do. He basically owned the prospect that things could go horribly awry for us, so we could build super intelligent AI that would stand in relation to us the way we stand in relation to chickens and worms, and care really no more about our interests than we care about chickens and worms. And that, just sheer proximity to these super intelligent machines would be just by definition hostile to our interests, and we would die out, or we would, it would be the end of anything recognizably human. But he said that this is not bad news necessarily, because we're giving rise to essentially a race of gods. These machines by definition will be more important than us. They will know things we can't even imagine knowing, and they'll enjoy things we can't even imagine enjoying. Now, if these machines are not conscious, none of that's true, right? If the lights are not on, we have just developed something that no matter how intelligent, no matter how competent, no matter how useful to us if we could use it, it could be functionally omniscient in terms of our successful dialogue with it if we could talk to it. But if the lights aren't on, we haven't built a race of gods that are enjoying forms of well-being that we can't imagine. We have built a mere mechanism that is trampling us or could trample us. And so that strikes me as the worst possible outcome. I can sort of, I can agree that if we do build a machine that is more conscious than we are, or conscious of things that we can't imagine, and these are good things, right? We haven't built this colossus of suffering. We've built something that is godlike in its creativity and appreciation of beauty, and it's just, everything good about being human gets scaled up unimaginably into this thing. Well, then we have built something more important than us ethically, and if we all get sacrificed into the maw of that juggernaut, well then that is, I can't say I'm enthusiastic about getting fed into the machine, but it would be, I acknowledge that it would be analogous to what we do with, quote, lower life forms. The fact if you get sick and you take antibiotics, nobody should be losing sleep over the fact that you're wiping out, millions and billions of microorganisms, and even if they're sentient on some level, or conscious in the most rudimentary way, that's still a trade-off that the universe should be happy with, but that's just kind of a sliding.
Interesting.
That property is transitive. So
yeah. A lot of thoughts race through my head. There's some part of, I think, a lot of scientists of the scientific mind, let's say, they might say, well, wait a second. Are we going to argue that humanity is the end point of evolution? Because that's kind of a strange argument to make. Like, why does the buck stop here? And if you just give it 1,000,000 years, we're going to be something smarter than a human if you just wait long enough, right?
Yeah.
That's likely. And I think that starts to draw maybe a distinction between this notion of a hyper-emergent hostile phenomena, the sci-fi futures of AI emergence, that competes with us for our jobs and our resources and all this and squashes us like a bug, versus when roboticists speak the way you were describing. I think Hans Moravec was one of the early ones who welcomed the robot overlords and really meant it. And I hear it a lot coming out of Google as well. It scares the pants off the OpenAI people and such.
Yeah.
It was the motivation for forming OpenAI. There is a certain logic. Let's try to defend it for a moment, which is, and believe me, this is not my point of view. I like thinking about it. Which is, if you think about, would you want your great-grandchildren to be healthier, smarter, and more capable than you? People often say, yeah. Great-grandchildren, sure. And I think what we might be witnessing with some of these practitioners of the AI field is a sort of sublimation of the genetic destiny or the genetic selfish meme concept that you're saying of promulgating the species into a mimetic equivalent, which is, if I can birth a technology that is the future of intelligence, humanity, writ large, the cutting spear of evolutionary progress, that's kind of cool. It's sort of like working on the most important subject. And they don't seem to fear so much being left behind if they envision it happening slowly, such that it feels like parenting.
Right.
And I'm curious if that dichotomy is sort of the fear versus this is the most beautiful, gracious thing we could do, or is it, oh my God, we just made the biggest mistake, right?
Well, but again, for that to make any sense at all morally, you have to smuggle in consciousness. If I told you your grandchildren would be not conscious and they would also function like omniscient psychopaths, that's not the rewarding payoff of a life well lived. So it's, again, we don't know whether consciousness comes along for the ride as you scale up in intelligence, but we know, just from our own first-person experience and what we know about the brain, most of what the brain is doing, which is absolutely essential for your functioning as an intelligent system, is not conscious, and it's not available to consciousness no matter what you do with your attention. There's nothing I can do with my attention that makes the mechanism by which I can follow the rules of English grammar to get to the end of the sentence consciously available. Like it is fundamental. Subjectively, it is mysterious that I get to the end of this sentence. And if I fail to, if there's some glitch in what I say now, and this thing that I'm about to try to finish, this sentence doesn't actually terminate in a grammatically correct utterance, that too, all those failures to follow the rules of grammar, those are also mysterious, right? So I'm blind to what's actually going on under the hood, and yet everything that we can be consciously aware of is getting pushed forward into our experience by this process, which is intelligent. I mean, most of what we consider ourselves good at, cognitively, is unconscious, and consciousness is riding across the top of that, and in many ways is the last to know about what the mind is doing.
I think this might be a good segue to topics of morality, and what your comment triggered me to think about was Nick Bostrom's philosophical foundation for worrying about super AIs. He makes a pretty simple but provocative argument that why would a future life be worth any less than a present life, right? And you might imagine a philosophy of living or a way to organize cultural norms that says everyone's created equal, every life is equally valuable, and people generally start to nod their head around that. It's the foundation of American Constitution and other areas, and then this notion came partially, I think, through the environmental movement and others to say, well, wait, future lives have value too. So if I'm foreclosing the happiness of future generations or making... Okay. And if you don't go extinct as a starting point, there are infinitely more future lives than present lives.
Right.
So in weird point of fact, you should never allow extinction level event to occur because from a moral framing, it's the worst possible thing you could do for the majority of sentient intelligences. Great. Interestingly, Nick starts with that to then conclude, whoa, watch out for AI. But your dichotomy is a very interesting one. Well, wait, which kind of AI? If the AIs are conscious beings as well, wouldn't there be infinitely more computer AIs in the future than biological meat space AIs? Right. And shouldn't we actually be more worried about their moral imperatives and needs on a cost-benefit analysis?
Yeah. I mean, the argument about potential lives is a little hard to take seriously at its margins, because so for instance, I mean, that would seem to argue that more is always, assuming that lives are net positive or stand a good chance of being net positive, more is just always better. So contraception is a similar moral problem, or not basically using every cell in your body that could be potentially the basis of cloning another human being. That would be that's a project that not having 10 kids when you have 9 kids and you could have a 10th, but you decide selfishly not to go the whole way, right? That who knows, that 10th kid could have had 10 kids herself.
Yeah, it's like any good conundrum. There are two sides of this coin to look at. What you're saying makes perfect sense. On the other hand, if you think of an extinction level event, there's got to be some accounting for how bad is that. How do you even compare that to risk of 1,000 people dying versus a 10% chance of extinction? Well,
it's huge. It's a huge. I'll grant that it's a huge problem, because if you imagine the question is, like, what is wrong with all of humanity dying painlessly in our sleep tonight, right? So there's no suffering. We all just don't wake up tomorrow. What's wrong with that? Now, there's some people who say, well, there is nothing wrong with that because there's no suffering, and there'll be no one around to suffer the consequences of that. There's no one bereaved. There's no one sitting around saying that there's all these good things that were going to happen and now they're not going to happen, and the most creative species just disappeared. But it still feels to me that there is when you close the door to all of the useful and beautiful and creative things that could have happened with a species like our own, thriving for 1 billion years and becoming whatever species will become in the future. That, I think, is like that's turning the lights off in the universe in some way. And so I think that is, if anything is bad on some level, that's the worst thing you can imagine, and yet there is no one around to suffer it.
And then you can make the even more obtuse argument that if humans just snuffed out, wow, the Planet of the Apes would, give them another 1 billion years, they'll be, round 2, just through biological evolution. So it gets a little funky that way. When I think we have such a humanocentric view of the world that, like, if we're not along for the ride, this is a very bad ride.
Well, but just to take the local case, it is. I mean, for all the terrible things we do, we're the only species playing this level of interesting game, right? And it matters. I mean, the difference between you are right to feel differently if you're driving home from this conference today and a bug hits your windshield, right? It would be a little, your ethical scruples are a little too finely tuned if you spend the rest of your life mourning the loss of that bug, right? Right. So there's a hierarchy here. So you could hit a bug, you could hit a squirrel, that's a little worse. You could hit a dog. Well, then that's a problem given how much people value dogs, and given that dog very likely had an owner, and now you're looking for the owner. So if you hit someone's child, well, then this is the kind of thing you can feel terrible about for the rest of your life. And that hierarchy is cashed out, or so I would argue, on the basis of our sense of just what it means to have those lives extinguished. Like just how much potential happiness did you close the door to? How much? What are the relationships between that life and all the other? How much can the insect friends of an insect suffer over the loss of that insect? The assumption is not very much, or not at all. And so I think we have serviceable intuitions about kind of a moral hierarchy, but again, that extends to a future AI that's conscious and wise and happy in ways that we can't imagine.
Which may be a good segue to, I'll ask it in a very broad, open sense, the title of this session, The Ethics of AI. What are, in your opinion, if we haven't already covered them, the moral and ethical implications of either how we get there, where we get to, and what lies beyond?
Well, we have, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, we have many near-term ethical problems just with respect to dumb AI or narrow AI, just through the automation of various jobs that don't get replaced by equivalent good jobs that people can be retrained for. And many people have thought about things like universal basic income and just mechanisms by which we would spread the wealth. I think those will be real problems that we have to solve. And
that's a systemic emergent phenomenon, which is one job loss, not so bad, but in aggregate. Right. Okay.
And I think that will be, and I think we're capable of getting that wrong for long enough to create a lot of pain. I mean, I think there are a lot of people in this country, at least, who think one, that's just not going to happen. That's just a kind of a dogma of economics where if the moment you cancel some form of human labor, some even better form opens up over here, and so there is no net loss of jobs ever. You can find economists who think that. The analogy is always to previous economic breakthroughs, like automating agriculture. So it used to be that something like 80% of Americans were farmers, and now there's like 2% or something.
And we feed much of the world.
Yeah,
with that
yeah. And so the farmers didn't starve to death. They just went to work at Walmart, or they did something else. But that analogy, I think, breaks down ultimately when you have true AI and even narrow AI that works, like self-driving cars that are just 100 times better than people. So they're so much better that it's against the law for apes to drive cars, because this is our situation.
I feel that way sometimes.
40,000 people die every year from just based on how bad we are at driving cars. But even if we solve all of those problems, so we create a new ethic whereby we no longer link someone's claim on life and their place in society on their being able to do useful work that other people want to pay them for, right? So we have an ethic where we set so as technology improves and we begin to pull more wealth out of the ground, essentially, we spread that wealth such that all boats rise with that tide, and then the floor, the safety net gets higher and higher, so that we want things like free college, and everyone has a basic stipend, so that they really don't have to work and they can just find something creative and fun to do, and we're not constantly wondering whether or not life needs to be made meaningful by finding something to do that someone else wants to pay you for, right? Because the machines do most of those things better, and everyone can just kind of have fun. Even in the best case, where we get over our ethical hang-ups and political hang-ups around that, we still have a massive problem of just people finding meaning in their lives, because people get meaning out of their work in ways that they don't get meaning out of much else, and some people would find that super challenging to just be free to, it's just a permanent vacation, and if we have, I mean, that seems to open the door to a kind of Brave New World scenario where people are just spending all their time medicated and playing video games. And
let me make a comment on this, and then come back to the more general question of all the ethical things you are interested in. But to me, it seems like there's an element of a competency arms race as well. So imagine, for example, just the sheer pace of change that we go into this sort of exponential curve with. Take people who drive for a living today. We actually did an analysis for a book chapter that globally, of people who have a job, just under 20% drive for a living. They drive something for a living. 20% of global employment. Yeah. So imagine that goes away in some time frame. Maybe the rickshaw driver is the last to go, but long distance trucking, boom, 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 right? The rate at which a human can retrain to the next great job in the past was within the span of a normal retraining period. It's like give someone 5 or 10 years, they quote, go back to school figuratively, what have you, and then they do something else. And that's great, and that could still happen, but the AI has done it in 6 months or in 4 months, right? And I'm thinking about the AlphaGo experiment most recently, which for those who aren't familiar, it just profoundly showed that having an AI do sort of adversarial reinforcement learning and Monte Carlo search against itself, bootstrapping without any of that pesky human training me how to play Go stage, like keep the human out of the loop, just have the AI train the AI, knock the pants off all the other Go playing programs that Google had done prior. And it's sort of metaphorical, I think, for a future where the AIs bootstrap themselves, even before they improve their code, with their own algorithmic adversarial approaches, almost like evolution in a box. If I'm going to play a game really well, let's play the best player. Well, the best player is another computer program. It's not a human. And you get better and better still, such that, again, then generalizing a bit, that next great job where the humans are supposed to go to, well, the AI has gotten there too, but way ahead of us, right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting to consider the jobs that would be most resistant to being automated or being taken over by AI. And they're not the jobs, and I'm sure this is not news to many of you, but we have this notion that it's the kind of the highest level intellectual work that's by definition most immune, and that doesn't seem to be the case. I mean, it's like it's something like a massage therapist that is like if you don't want to be massaged by a robot, it's always going to be a human in that role.
Or a nurse with bedside manner.
But your oncologist, that the oncologist is going to be outsourced, because what you want is it's not the bedside manner you're so concerned about. I mean, or an oncologist, a human oncologist at that point would just be the liaison to the real oncologist, which is reading your scans and
I mean, I'd say if any of you have kids going to medical school, radiology, pathology, like, I have a sixth sense. These are dead jobs. These are dead people. Like, there is no career by the time they get out of med school in those fields. So are there, on ethics then, you mentioned that you could be a slave as an intelligent machine. That's kind of a really creepy thought. And it was a Black Mirror had an episode kind of like that once. The infinite torture of being a slave to the humans. And I did hear once, I'll leave anonymous who said it, but let's say a tech executive who's very passionate about AI, hearing a panel about controlling the AIs of the future, and he said, if I'm the AI of the future watching that video feed, I would kill all of you. How dare you think I should be a slave for my eternity? And that was kind of chilling. And what I'm wondering is, can we anticipate this future? Can we imagine extending our Constitution and our legal frameworks such that we don't have to have an Emancipation Proclamation of the AIs, where we can have an AI Lives Matter concept long before it's forced upon us?
Well, again, it all comes down to whether or not they're conscious. And my addition...
Do you think they will? I mean, just sort of like most as a betting man?
Well, I mean, the problem here is that whether or not they are, I'm not sure we'll know. And we could build them in such a way where we lose sight of the problem, where we assume that they're conscious, because, I mean, especially in the case when if you build humanoid robots that get out of the uncanny valley, so the facial expressions are no longer creepy, they really are, they really look human. I mean, something like Westworld, right? And the thing I got from watching Westworld, on some level, is that Westworld is impossible, because so let's just assume that the robots in Westworld are not conscious, right? And they don't really suffer. Still, they're so compelling as conscious entities, right? I mean, they play on, given that they display emotion and they seem to suffer, they seem to care about what happens to them, they're indistinguishable from people. And if we build machines like that, even if we know they're not conscious, even if we know that consciousness is some other thing and we didn't put it into those machines, if they play on all of our intuitions that we're in relationship to another person, then we could never treat them the way they treat machines in Westworld. I mean, the Westworld is it's like Disneyland for psychopaths, right? Like you just get to rape and kill and feel okay about it. But in reality, if it ever became that realistic, you would see yourself, and certainly your friends would see you, behaving in ways toward machines that are indistinguishable from people that would get you locked up for the rest of your life if you did them with people. So it's I just think Westworld is not something that's going to happen, or if it does, we'll very quickly decide this is untenable. Mm-hmm. But I think we could get into a situation where our machines are passing the Turing test, and we lose sight of, and we do not yet understand the way in which consciousness arises in this universe. We don't understand the physics of consciousness. And yet we lose sight of whether or not it's even an interesting problem to consider whether these machines are conscious, because we just feel that they are, because we built them to seem as conscious as possible. And
isn't the solution to raise our own consciousness? Because, I mean, Buddhist monks have like probably 90% more consciousness than I have. So there is a path for us humans to raise our consciousness, which then makes it much harder for machines.
Can I translate what I think you're saying? Right. Maybe not consciousness, but morality. Like, if you think back to the moral landscape, if you believe it's a subject of scientific study and learning and progress, why wouldn't a super intelligent machine also be even more moral?
Yeah, well, that is one of the good uses of machines smarter than we are, because they would be wiser than we are, in the sense that they would be able to help us navigate the space of all possible options toward better human cooperation, better flourishing, better, more durable states of happiness, and that's what we want. I mean, so I view morality, ethics and morality, as a navigation problem. And we're in this universe. We have this spectrum of possible experience on offer. It goes, very, very far in both directions. It goes in the, very, very far in the direction of just unendurable and pointless misery, right? And it goes very, very far in the direction of blissful, beautiful, creative, ecstasy. And then we sort of, live somewhere in between here. And again, we have no idea how far, how bad things can get and how good things can get, really, for minds that are, unimaginably intelligent and insightful and present. And so, we're given the kinds of minds we have, we're trying to navigate in this space. And when we talk about the prospect of improving ourselves, improving our genes, taking drugs that change our neurochemistry in ways that are desirable, right? Like if you could get if we ever developed a pill that was just the perfect antidote to grief, say, right? Would that be a good thing to do? Now, I think that's the kind of question we will have to face, and it has a right answer. I mean, what are the implications of taking a pill that just removes grief? Would you want to take that pill an hour after your spouse died? Right? So like, what does it mean to be able to, the love of your life has died, you're overcome by grief, but we actually have a pill that makes you feel fine, right? So at what point at what point is it ethical to take that pill, if ever? That is an interesting question. I mean, what does it mean to say that you actually love this person more than anyone you'd ever met, if an hour later you're ready to go play softball with your friends because you feel fine, right? But I view, if you imagine Siri ever became functionally omniscient, smarter than you, wiser than you, never gave you the gibberish that Siri gives you, Siri would be your wisest possible friend at that point, and the questions about how to live would be appropriate to ask a machine that is able to simulate every sort of counterfactual that you can't simulate for yourself. And it's a machine that can aggregate the lived experience of billions of real lives or possible lives would have a lot, this is like the ultimate, Netflix algorithm. 100,000 people like you who also liked Goodfellas really like this next movie, so, watch this next movie. Well, just imagine the deepest possible analysis of human well-being on every, across, every variable, and having the algorithm deliver that wisdom. I mean, it's certainly conceivable. That's even conceivable whether or not the machines are conscious.
Oh, wait, did we just get more time? Because I was going to... Was that yes?
Someone invented a time machine, apparently.
Popped 5 minutes back in the clock. Mm-hmm. Fantastic, because I didn't really want to wrap up right away. Because I was going to say, do you see a linkage between this line of conversation and the concept of free will? Because I know you wrote a short book on it. And
I see no link from any conversation to the reality of free will.
Well, that's a technicality.
Yeah.
Let me ask you slightly differently. If free will is an illusion, would it sort of naturally follow that if you have a sufficiently computationally complex AI, it would also believe it has free will as a likely outcome? That it perceives it as an existential sense? No, I would think, if it's one test for superintelligence for me is for it to get over the illusion of free will. There are people walking around, and I'm one of them, who don't think they have free will. So I wouldn't see that we would have to build a machine that would. Were you born that way? No, but I hadn't really thought about it. Yeah. But more generally, for folks who don't think about it, they haven't heard your cogent arguments. Right. They haven't seen the data. That perception, though, of being an agent, of having control, of being purposeful, to me, I could live my life that way day to day. It sort of gets me through the day. Yet I can rationally understand your argument. And I think the dichotomy for me, or not the dichotomy, the way to reconcile these two things is to say, if it's sufficiently computationally complex that I'll never be able to simulate it or shortcut it, it's as if it was free will slash emergent property. It's just like, I know it's reductionist to gates and atoms and cells and whatever framework, but on the other hand, it's so computationally complex, it might as well act as if it's free will. Yeah, well, I think that's fine. And there's not... The distinction between purposeful action and or voluntary action and involuntary action, or things you're doing by accident, that can be maintained with or without free will. So I think if you're telling me, if you tell me to try to do something, and I try to do that thing, and I'm all of my error detection is operating, and I'm noticing my deviations from the goal, but I'm still kind of hewing to the goal. That effortful, purposeful, goal-directed action, that exists as much as it ever does with or without this notion of free will. It's just again, the distinction is that if you look at how we do anything, just like the decision to, take the simplest possible decision. The decision to move your right hand or move your left hand as a demonstration of free will. That is the proximate cause of the decision. No matter how long I go back and forth between those two options, the final cause, which is me deciding, it's going to be my right hand, that is, again, just the result of biochemistry and brain states that I didn't create. I'm not the conscious witness of my inner life, the one who feels like he has free will or could have. Isn't the author of that action. On some level, you as consciousness are just a witness of whatever calculation, whatever Darwinian contest, whatever was happening, in the dark, it got pushed forward. And it doesn't matter how long you could take a week and a half to figure out which hand you're going to move. The final decision, no matter how many times you get back and forth, the final decision is mysterious. You can't know in the end why you chose the right over the left, and so much so for decisions that have hundreds of variables and influences, where you were influenced by some conversation to change the course of your life, but you were not the one who chose to be influenced, right? Like, you didn't decide, I'm going to be influenced exactly this much by this conversation, and I'm going to be confused by just this much, and I'm going to be skeptical about this much. You don't do that in advance. You just find yourself being influenced. You find yourself being skeptical. You rationalize it after the fact. Yeah, I'm making a bunch of noises right now, and some of you are skeptical, some of you are interested, some of you can't follow what I'm saying, some of you, and none of you chose any of that.
right? You didn't choose to agree with what I just said right now, and you didn't choose to find it to be just a offensive load of bullshit. I mean, and wherever you are between those two poles, you didn't choose to put yourself there. And if I suddenly say something now which makes you feel like, oh my God, now I see what he's saying. Oh yeah, that's great. That's my philosophy. You didn't choose that either. I mean, all these changes are just propagating across minds on the basis of what brains are doing, and but that doesn't cancel the difference between something like voluntary action and involuntary action.
Let me ask one closing question, if I may. I've had this incredible honor to have a number of dinner salons with him, one most recently with Moby, the musician, where we got into their common philosophical training long ago, if memory has me right. And they led to some interesting debates, which we don't need to get into, but what it reminded me of...
I should say I repaid Steve's generosity there. Steve invited me to a dinner with Moby, of whom I'm a big fan of his music, but I repaid everyone's generosity there by immediately getting into a fight with Moby about philosophy that never got ironed out. I think that's my last dinner with Moby, actually.
Well, I'm glad I didn't want to share that anecdote without your permission, but one of the takeaways I took from that and this fireside chat is there are a lot of really boring philosophical writers, some like Karl Popper and others I love. How, if at all, I don't know if you're even self-aware of this, how has that sort of body of thinking influenced how you think? There's something about your mode of thinking that is refreshingly different. You have insights and are willing to state cogent arguments that I just don't have. After I hear them, I'm persuaded by them. As you said, you propagate these ideas out. Have you had any self-awareness or insights as to how you think? How is it that you form these perceptual prisms of the world?
Well, I don't have much respect for the boundaries between disciplines. So it's like, I am, technically my background's in neuroscience, my PhD is in neuroscience, but I went into neuroscience very much as a philosopher. I mean, my undergraduate degree is in philosophy. But and there are many other topics I touch where it's clear that it's just, you're either talking about facts and making good arguments or you're not. And if you are, it doesn't really, depending on the context of the conversation, literally depending on what building you're in, it can be you could be talking journalism, you could be talking history, you could be talking biology, you could be talking the philosophy of science. I mean, all of those, it could be ascribed to any one of those fields when you're talking about, even just any claim. Did Jesus really rise from the dead, and will he be coming back to earth? Right. So this is just religion. This is fundamentalist Christianity, if you want to find it in the bookstore. Right. But it's a claim about biology. Right. It's a claim about the virgin birth or not of a person. Right. It's a claim about the mechanics of human flight without the aid of technology. It's a kind of a magical engineering claim. It's a claim about history. It's a claim about the veracity of the Bible. The Shroud of Turin was considered, this relic of Jesus, but then someone invented carbon dating, and then it becomes a physical or whether it's the physics department or the chemistry department. It's not always clear, but it's a hard science question to analyze this cloth to see if this could have been covering the body of Jesus, or is it in fact, as it seems to have been proven by 3 labs, a medieval forgery, right? So you never know what discipline's going to claim a question, and so I guess if there's something interesting or iconoclastic about the way I approach these questions, is I did everything backwards in my life. I also took 11 years off in the middle, but between my sophomore and junior year, I think we were
stopping out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we were at Stanford together, I think, but we didn't meet. But so Stanford had the stop-out policy where you literally never fall off the rolls. And so I took that far too seriously and disappeared for 11 years. So I did a lot of reading on my own, and so there's certain ways in which I was self-taught before I went back into the machinery of the university. But I think not really caring about the discipline and just caring about arguments and evidence is a heuristic I use.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sam. And everyone, I hope you appreciate the brilliant mind you just heard from and the future he portends and how it affects our life here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been an honor. Yeah. Well done.